Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome. Welcome to another episode of Fake Accents Unite Quarantine Edition, or as I've named it this week, What's Up My Quarantinos Edition. I'm joined this week, as you may have noticed, either through Twitter or from the description of this video, this week by, as always, the Britisher. Good evening, sir.
I refuse to answer to Quarantino.
I won't call you Quentin at any point during the course of this stream, don't worry. We're also joined by Tailed Feature. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Pleasure to have you on. How are we all enjoying the lockdown this week?
I'm so bored.
It's mind-numbing, isn't it?
It really is. It's taken this for me to realise just how few hobbies I have and few interests I have.
How about yourself, Britisher? Has your routine changed at all?
Ask me something else.
Oh boy. Okay. Well, we shall avoid.
Yes, I decided to answer that in the manner of the director responsible for the coronavirus for the World Health Organization when asked about Taiwan
Good
by
grief.
a Hong Kong journalist.
Yes. What was his name? I'm trying to remember.
Hang on, I had his name down here somewhere.
To acknowledge Taiwan. This was Dr. Senior Advisor during
Bruce Aylward.
Bruce Aylward, yes. An aide to the World Health Organization Director General, Dr. Tedros Adhanom, which is an interesting name, too close to ad hominem. But yeah, this is the story where basically and in an interview with, who was it? A reporter, basically a reporter.
It was some Hong Kong TV station or something, I think.
Yeah, and this Canadian physician who's the aide, Dr. Aylward, basically sat down and he was asked whether or not the World Health Organization would consider Taiwan's membership of it. And then he refused to answer the question, pretended that he didn't hear the question, despite the fact that
it was... Well, first he said, I didn't hear it.
Yes, but it was a very clear lie.
Then said, maybe you want to ask me another question, a different question instead.
Yeah.
So
I'm sorry.
He needed to hear a different question if he hadn't heard the first one.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear your question, Yvonne. Okay, let me repeat the question. No, that's okay. Let's move to another one then. It's just like deflect. So she then asked the same question. He hung up on her. So they called him again and asked basically the same question, what his thoughts were on Taiwan's response to the outbreak. To which the answer was, well, we've already talked about China. You know, when you look across all the different areas of China, they've actually all done quite a good job. That was the end of that. Oh dear. Which led, of course, the World Health Organization to have to release a statement. Because people were saying, oh, you know, when exactly did you become a front for Chinese propaganda?
Was the statement one of those kind of, cheap 1970s kung fu film overdubs, if you know what I mean? Where you can see the guy's mouth is moving, but just there are nowhere near enough words coming out of the audio to correspond with it.
Indeed.
Who is this Bruce guy, though? What is he to the World Health Organization?
He's an aide to the Director General.
So. Yes, but I believe he is specifically the one who has been put in charge of the World Health Organization's coronavirus pandemic response.
See, is anyone actually confirmed any of this? Because I did, when I first watched the video, I thought this looks very suspect. The fact that he was standing in front of basically what looked like a towel with the WHO logo on it and stuff made me a little bit suspicious.
Well, but then again, given that they're all at the moment, sitting in their own living rooms or whatever, given that he even had access to something that would be a United Nations towel/flag, indicates that he's got a much greater chance of being the person he is believed to be. I mean, I did actually look him up, and his Wikipedia page does correspond with that face. So,
okay.
he does seem to be the man we're talking about.
I love the idea that they thought that a reasonable expense was to give all of their staff World Health Organization towels for the event that when they're sitting having an interview, they can hang it on the radiator behind them. It's just proof of your funds going to the right places, isn't it? With all these NGOs, goodness me. But yes,
no
they did.
doubt if there are any interviews with SNP politicians, they'll all have some kind of tartan blanket over their radiator behind them.
Anybody.
Do they have like the house tartans tailed that go on?
The SNP probably do have their own bloody official tartan. I bet they do. I've never actually checked.
Is it as yellow as their bellies? That's the question.
Oh, I'll actually have to check, see if there is an SNP tartan.
If you find it, we'll pop it up on the stream.
Well, there is an official SNP tartan lamb's wool scarf available for £25. So this is some kind of grey-black tartan with a little bit of yellow woven in,
yeah.
which obviously would be the party colours. So, whether this is official or whether this is something they've improvised themselves, I don't know. But
Well,
yes,
the first thing that
apparently
came
you
up.
can purchase an SNP tartan lamb's wool scarf.
Yes. Well, the thing that I looked up was an article from the BBC from 2008. It says the SNP anniversary tartan unveiled. So it's the 75th anniversary, which was in 2009. So yes, it looks like you can get an SNP, and if the full works. Full works.
Why you'd ever want to wear one, we don't know. But it's out there if you're that desperate.
Yes. Let's not put it up on the screen.
The World Health Organization, of course, just jumping back a second here, did a spokesperson said the World Health Organization's focus at all times is to ensure that all areas of the globe have the information they need to manage the health of their people. In a recent interview, the WHO official who headed the joint international mission to China did not answer a question on Taiwan's response to the COVID-19 outbreak. The question of Taiwanese membership in the WHO is up to WHO member states, not staff. However, WHO is working closely with all health authorities, including Taiwanese health experts. It's just like the most corporatist, nothing statement as possible that they could have made. It's like, if he is not responsible for it, he couldn't just say, "I'm not responsible for that." Whereas we all know, we do, that his position as the as part of the joint international mission to China is under threat if he so much as acknowledges Taiwan's existence as an independent state.
I think we can agree Taiwan is the Voldemort of nations.
It's that which must not be named. Alongside other things. Aaron Telford says, #Britisher for PM or we riot. A most trustworthy man. Response, Britisher. Your thanks, perhaps? Your paid shills being here?
Yes, yeah. The check will be in the post. I don't know what to say. I could well imagine that I would be a dreadful prime minister. But no doubt we all like to think that we would fancy ourselves being able to do it.
Oh God, no.
But yes, at the moment it would actually be upon one, the sword of Damocles would start swinging above one's head very heavily, wouldn't it?
Indeed. Not to mention, of course, that you, as soon as you came into power, would immediately ban so much that you would make Mary Whitehouse look like some kind of angelic
I would
liberal goddess.
I would suddenly turn into Mr. Hardline.
Yes, it would be enforced swimsuits in the streets. We all know this.
Yes. I'm with you there. Yeah.
For all shapes and sizes, although certain sizes would obviously be deported to a small island in the South Pacific, just so that you could only ever ogle prime rib, as it were, that you're interested in.
Yes, I can very well imagine that you would become a chief consultant to the government regarding the how do we say, the sports dress of various female netball teams.
So what you're saying is that corruption would run all the way to the top.
Well, I mean, my first act would just be to deport Jermaine Greer. There wouldn't necessarily need to be an island where they drop her off. Just, just
Oh,
drop
dear.
her off, will you?
Again, referencing the stream from last week with the Red Dwarf appreciation segment, I every time I hear Jermaine Greer, I hear in my head, I don't know the actress's name, but basically the female Lister from the Hollyhock
Yep.
episode going, Jeremy Greer, haven't you read The Male Eunuch? You're not one of those boring masculinists, are you? Oh dear. I can see plenty. Oh, I have the audio nicely balanced. Apparently, this must be a first. Thank you. I tried my best to have a fiddle with it before the stream
Yes,
began.
but maybe the two of you have an answer to this question. Because this was one of the things I wanted to put in the week that was, but then it sort of, got that much ahead of myself. In the
You were
end,
lazy.
it didn't end up going in. Well, if you knew what the last 48 hours were like, you wouldn't say that. But anyway.
Okay. Oh, you.
My,
We'll talk later. Are you okay, Britisher?
because my my question simply is, where is Gina Miller?
Okay.
Are you familiar with Gina Miller?
I mean,
Yes.
broadly speaking, yes.
Well, because how shall we say? I shall put this to you here, and see what you think. I'll put this in the links.
All right.
Because yes, where is Gina Miller?
So we have the UK Parliament to close early for. Oh, did she get angry about the proroguing of Parliament last time? Is that what you're getting at?
She was a
Well,
bit more than angry about it.
All the way to the Supreme Court, if I
Yeah.
remember rightly.
Yes.
Now a virus comes along, they close the whole thing down, and nobody says a peep.
I mean, she seemed to be going after any excuse to have a court case, because she was also responsible for the for trying to sue the Secretary of State for exiting the European Union because she didn't think that the government had authority to implement Brexit without full approval from a parliament.
Thank God for that woman, because otherwise we would have had the Theresa May deal.
Yeah.
So in a way, she kind of became a curse upon herself, because
So we got to Theresa May deal, but a little bit better instead. Like, it wasn't that.
The reason the Theresa May deal wasn't just sort of nodded through was because Parliament had to have a say, because she forced through the meaningful vote, as it was called.
That was right, yes.
And that was really only thanks to her. So Gina Miller did save the nation, more than likely not in the way she intended to. But yes, now they've just decided to take the Easter recess 1 week early. So, during this time of crisis, during this very time in which the government is taking stringent measures, nobody is holding them to account. If I remember rightly, that those were the arguments that were being put forward, and now everybody's ordered to stay at home. Police are rampaging about, telling people whether they can or cannot sell Easter eggs.
Oh, for goodness sake.
And Gina Miller, we haven't heard a peep.
No, I thought you were referencing. I'm completely lost for a second there.
I was thinking that the whole crisis must be nearing an end, because it had been a whole 3 weeks or something for the SNP and the Greens to not go on about Brexit. So I thought, oh, everybody's on board with all this stuff and all that, but they've already started going, well, because of the pandemic, we should just halt the whole thing. And
Yes, I saw your tweet yesterday. Yes, that was.
Oh dear,
the Greens are on it as well. It's not just the SNP this time.
I tell you, the general silence from the opposition, I think, has been quite telling. because they really the closest that we had was Jeremy. The biggest thing that I saw come out left was Jeremy Corbyn going out to clap in the street and definitely not abiding by social distancing rules with someone else who came out to meet him or something. And then him also doing these really weird half-hearted claps. This was for those of you who are not in the UK and don't know, there was, I think, was it yesterday or was it the day before?
A few days ago now.
Yeah, a few days ago. Basically, there was a big campaign so that at 8 p.m. People would come out of their houses to their windows, to their balconies or whatever, depending on where you live, and applaud and clap for the NHS workers who are working hard to keep us safe and whatnot. And I've got nothing against that personally, although it's a little bit cringe. If it encouraged them, then all the better. But Jeremy
It's one
Corbyn,
of those things that it just makes it feel like people are doing something rather than doing nothing.
yeah, they're like they can't do anything meaningful, so the least they can do is provide kind of supportive atmosphere, I guess. But Jeremy Corbyn went out into the street and started doing like.
Yeah, he went full rock star, didn't he?
It
Was
was.
he doing a bit of Queen? Was he?
Oh, he was just like, "Come on, everybody, let's clap for the surgeons. Let's clap for the nurses." And it was just this weird kind of like double clap thing that he was doing.
The best thing to come out of all this was the BBC's live kind of Corona update timeline, because I'll just put it in the chat, because you got this amazing lining up of breaking news: United States becomes center of virus pandemic.
And,
UK erupts in applause.
I'm gonna put that up. Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well spotted. That's a gem.
Oh
Yes.
dear.
Yes, I must thank the people of one of the Discords that I'm in for sharing that, because I've just been sharing that constantly.
Oh, that's
made me chuckle.
IMG 202. There we go. Yeah, pop that on the screen for everyone to see. Yeah, that's a gem. Yeah. But so aside from Jeremy Corbyn doing that, although I can see in the chat, the Object of Hate, for instance, is saying, in Switzerland, it's every bloody day at 9 p.m. that people are clapping from their windows and balconies for the last 10 days. Unlike, of course, the British, who...
Oh, we wouldn't want to overdo it now, would we?
Yes, we wouldn't want to overdo it. Be austere. They've had their fun, but they need to be rationed, their applause. That's what it is. Just don't mind it too much. But the other thing from the left has been Gordon Brown.
I'm assuming that in Switzerland the state yodeling championships have been cancelled, so they haven't got anything else to do.
Well, surely the yodeling's done in the mountains. Surely that qualifies as being socially distant.
Well, I mean, if the kind of information films that some of the constabularies are putting out is anything to go by, then obviously not.
But you mean
I don't know
they're
whether you saw that clip of people somewhere in somewhere hiking in the countryside or whatever, and they were saying, "Oh, this is not essential," and you sort of thought, well, yes, I grant you, it's not essential. They've driven there and then they've gone for a walk rather than going for a walk immediately outside their house. But there are no other people for miles.
Yes, they sent out the non-essential. It's like, but it's the lowest risk thing that you could physically do.
Precisely. Yeah.
Also, it's such a city mindset as well. Like 12 miles is not a long distance for the countryside. It really isn't. And if I was down in Sussex, for instance, and I wanted to go up on the Downs, it's like 8 miles, and I could go for a walk up the South Downs. But there's no risk there. The closest you get to a risk is you brush against someone else's car door, and that happens to have it on it. But
I fully understand the need to kind of try and enforce this and whatever. But
yes.
again, just use a little bit of common sense, people.
Yeah.
So they
Uh,
did that. They did that clip where they filmed people from a drone, and then they kind of highlighted this person and that person, and then there was some on-screen writing, as in, "Oh, take selfie in beauty spot, non-essential."
Yeah.
You think, well, yes, except as you can see on the picture, there isn't anybody there in a circumference, in a radius of 5 miles in any direction.
Yes, I believe the Sky News correspondent who turned up. It's so weird, by the way, seeing the selected news correspondents at these kind of daily briefings turn. Because they basically wheel a screen in there. It's like having
Yep.
Holly from
Yes.
Red Dwarf turn up on a screen. But yeah, so they turn up and they said, are the police perhaps being a bit overzealous? Because I was clearly in reference to that thing, and they were like,
well,
we're
I think it's
going to
also-
we're going to release some guidelines, but it's very important that people follow the guidelines.
I mean, I have
think
to
it's
wonder.
all- So
a
go
lot of
ahead.
it does. A lot of it just seems to be look, just stay at home and make things a lot easier. I don't think they're so far anyway. They haven't said we'll arrest you, but having said that, I think there's some places in I believe Wales and Yorkshire have actually got the military police out with roadblocks and stuff now as well, and
Mhm.
pulling people over, saying, "Where are you going?" So all you need to do is say, "I'm going to the shop."
Yeah.
I
Well,
mean, unless you are
well,
literally in the middle of the lakes or something like that.
we've had a couple of incidents which have come to prominence, which have been members of the same family traveling in a car to shop for what the police derived as non-essential items.
Non-essential Easter eggs.
Or something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
And there was obviously the case of the 13-year-old who was the first person to be arrested for being in breach of the lockdown. Let me see if I can find it actually.
Well, laugh it up, Americans. This is happening to you as well, not just us.
Arrested for breaking lockdown. Let me see where this is.
See, I have to wonder. A lot of this is just actually so that the police are also social distancing. It gets them
Yeah.
out back on the beat. I haven't seen so many police
I
for
haven't.
years
I mean,
because they can't sit on computers in a row in an office arresting people for mean tweets anymore. They actually have to go outside and do something, and they're just kind of giving themselves work. Oh, you stop playing football for 5 minutes, and that kind of thing.
unfortunately, I haven't seen any real police presence. I think one car drove down the road yesterday, and it was notable enough to remember it. But yeah, I could go out anywhere around here, and there's no real police presence stopping people. Right, here we are. Yes, boy 13 arrested for breaking new coronavirus lockdown laws after refusing to give his name to the police. So he was taken into custody after being spotted in Leeds on Saturday morning, detained under the new law known as the Health Protection Coronavirus Restrictions Regulations 2020. Doesn't it just roll off the tongue? Which enables police to order members of the public to go home. And the reason why it got it came up and people knew about it was because the senior section officer posted out a tweet, since deleted, which said, "Today I arrested a 13-year-old male under the new coronavirus powers. He refused to give me any details so that I could take him home under the act. He was arrested and taken into custody, and his mother was dealt with for being a responsible person failing to comply."
Who comes across as the villain in that?
Let me guess. The next day, the Sun newspaper ran the headline, "They got him."
Osama bin Laden found at large under the guise of a 13-year-old male. We got him, and all we needed was the coronavirus to make it happen. But yes, apparently under these new powers, refusing to provide a name and address to avoid being given a fine is an arrestable offence. And it's just ridiculous. It's
Like, mate, you got your outside license.
Yeah, exactly, right. It's a 13-year-old kid. Regardless, you're allowed to go out for exercise. That includes going for a walk. I don't see any, unless they've observed this kid. They've gone round the block for the past 6 hours, and this kid is still there. It's frivolous, and not to mention
I've been out
how
for my
how
daily state-sanctioned exercise.
Yeah. Not to mention how absolutely macho do you have to be to arrest a 13-year-old? It's like no one's going around and arresting anyone of the same size. It's like, no, we'll pick on this kid first because it's easy pickings, right? Seems silly. It's very silly to me.
Well, I suppose if you're one of those PSOs or whatever they're called, the not real police, then actually, when you go home and went, I tackled a 13-year-old to the ground today. Like, well done, dear.
It's like, yes, the in 1984, the children who are being trained up to be informants, and
The
there was
snitches, yeah.
the snitches as vindictive and as nasty, and it's like their dad reminds me of that, yes, I dealt with an anti-state actor today. I put down someone who was in breach of democracy or something like that. Nonsense. Yes, British Knight in chat. Police. That kid is enjoying his walk a little too much. And yeah.
What's
Get
your
that
name?
smile off your face. Don't you know there's a pandemic?
What's your name? Ivor. Go on, Ivor Biggin.
Oh god. Glad to see you chiming in with useful anecdotes all the time, Britisher, and useful references as usual.
There must be some modern equivalent.
Probably, but I can't be bothered to think of it right now.
No, I'll come back with one next week.
Matchstick says, "Hail Britisher, Lord God King of the Earth." They're getting worse, man. You're gonna have to put them down. Splash some cold water on them.
I don't know whence this comes, to be honest. I don't know if this is some kind of reference to my Roman obsessions.
Look, you are the great radicalizer, and it's clear that you've built a cult around yourself.
Yes, of course.
A 20-year-old Britisher set himself on a path of wanton
If there is
destruction
anything
and
that is
conquest.
absolutely clear about all my behaviour on social media so far, is that I have been grooming people to be cult members. Yes.
In the great Britisher cult. You need a. Have you ever read any Terry Pratchett?
I've read bits and pieces of him. I'm not a great fan of Terry Pratchett.
Get Out.
I think he was sort of, I think he was heavily inspired by things like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and kind of made it an overall style and just ran with it. And I sort of think, well, there's only so and so many silly names and whatever that you can bear, and eventually you just go, no, leave me alone.
His early stuff was very much satirizing real life, and then after a while, and he found his stride, he made more unique and interesting stories. But the Discworld novels, there's one called Guards, which is, I believe it's the first in the Nightwatch series. But basically, he there's a cult in that, and there's a man who's masterminding the cult, and the cult are all members of kind of downtrodden tradespeople, a bit vindictive, a bit nasty, and most importantly, stupid. And it's just the thoughts of the great cult leader as he's trying to manipulate them into following him, and it gets all a bit out of hand. And I'm just imagining you at this point, just going like, "Oh, I must." At 20 years old, obviously, you're having these ideas. You're standing there, you're going, right. I must build the Church of the Britisher. I must have a suitably menacing, portal door to enter the lodge that we'll have, and oh yes, perhaps we'll have a code word to get in, so it sounds all mystical and that sort of thing. And slowly over time, it's got out of hand, and now you're revered as a god, and you don't really know what to do about it.
Is it? Am I the god of Fushal? Am I?
Not really. It's Fiji, man. Hikari Mannequin Eco says, "All hail the Britisher, master and commander."
Dear God.
I wonder how many more of those we'll get before the evening's out. British Knight says, "The world will end with Trump and the Britishers kaijus fighting for the title of God King of the Earth. the coronavirus is the first sign of the end times. Do you know
I
what
am so glad I don't even know what a kaiju is.
Godzilla is? A kaiju. It's basically
well, there
a
you go.
generic
Yes.
term for giant Japanese
So-
sea
It
monsters.
shall be the great beast that I send forth to do my bidding.
Jumping back to the political discussion we were having before we went off on this decidedly enjoyable tangent, to be fair. The only other thing I've seen from the left is from Gordon Brown. Have you heard about Gordon Brown and what he wants to happen?
Yes, there's you saying that it'll be the Britisher and Trump, but actually it might be Gordon Brown.
Have you heard about this, Britisher?
He wants a world government.
A global government. He has urged world leaders to create a temporary, note temporary, because these things always are, in the same way that the European Union gathering extra powers to itself, it's usually only temporary, just till we smooth these things over. And we're a government now that will never be removed. Gordon Brown is
What I find so interesting is with all the mentions, world government and coronavirus and whatever, nowhere does democracy figure.
no,
Because
not
obviously
really.
Alex
because
Jones
it's a
was right.
pandemic, we can't have a vote now. So, you would think that somebody who would no doubt like to think of himself a champion of democracy, because all politicians always like to think that there's something Churchillian, if you know what I mean. But then when he proposes a world government, no matter how temporary, for some reason, the idea that the world government ought to be elected doesn't figure.
No. Which is just like temporary world government with powers that are in far excess of any nation states.
Well, you just
Yeah.
wonder what happens to the island of Taiwan before the world government is dissolved.
Yes. You also wonder, given the current schism that's happening in the European Union regarding the southern states and the northern states, and the net takers and the net contributors, and of course the whole thing with Italy at the moment, and the kind of abysmal response that the European Union has been able to give to that, although they're still trying to consolidate their power. Whether the idea of adding even more nations, which are all pulling in different directions, because actually, what a global government doesn't seem to take into account is that these different states all pull in different directions because at their heart, they are still committed to themselves. So unless you can abolish national sentiment in its entirety, you can't do anything with that. Not to mention that even within a country, say, as small as the UK, even with a suitably large population that we have, we still get regional disputes. I mean, for goodness sake, the SNP want to secede. The Welsh are pissed off at the Labour government and also at the Tories in Westminster. Everyone hates London. And Northern Ireland is still on the ropes with the Republic of Ireland about whether or not they're going to merge together.
So what you mean is that it can't be done peacefully.
No, I mean not without an incredibly authoritarian scheme where if you fly the flag of any nation, area, organization, or cause, you should be shot in the street.
So not peaceably then.
No, not peaceably.
Talking of national sentiment, did either of you capture that viral clip that was doing the rounds of Italian mayors telling people to get off the street?
Yes, that was brilliant.
Oh, I have not seen that. No.
Oh, it's just fantastic. Anybody who tries to say that all the people of Europe are the same, any the kind of any representation of Italians in films like The Magnificent Men and Their Flying Machines or something like that, that it's totally stereotypical and completely not at all based on truth, yada yada yada. Just watch that clip and tell me it isn't so.
But yes, I like the way, right, so the article that I'm pulling this Gordon Brown thing from is a Guardian article. So of course they are sympathetic to him. And I love the way he's introduced here. The former Labour Prime Minister, who is at the centre of the international efforts to tackle the impact of the near meltdown of the banks in 2008.
Really?
Really? That's the most charitable way you could have described him, as
The man
opposed
who
to
saved the world.
the man who sold off all of our liquid assets, i.e., gold,
Well, the
in order
man
to
who not
balance
only
his books.
sold the gold, but the man who, as Chancellor, announced that he was going to sell the gold.
Yes.
So, I mean, just imagine that you announce to the markets, we are over the next few months going to sell off this much gold. What does the price do? I mean, you just think, no, you complete muppet. I mean, surely yes, you offload the gold and you do it in various stages, but as you do it, the price then goes gradually down. If you announce in advance, oh, we are going in the next 6 months to offload so and so many tons of gold, where do you think the price is going to be next day?
Oh, why is it £1 a gram right now? Like, you know.
Just it was one of those they various figures kind of actually calculated how much money the man had just cost the nation by doing that.
It's exactly it's the same thing as like when they was it Labour who sold the post office, or was that under the Tories? I think it was
That
the
was the
Tories,
Tory.
wasn't it? Yeah. It's a similar fiasco with government stuff, where it's like, oh, we're going to announce it, and this is going to be the price, and then suddenly, as soon as they've sold everything that they're going to sell, the price shoots straight through the roof. And they reckon that they undersold the value of the shares in Royal Mail by something like fourfold, right? Like, it was
Yep.
insane. Yes, so, and not to mention that, of course, he was also the man who, was it his government after where his chancellor had to announce that there is no money left.
Well, yes, I mean, that's true. In all fairness, I think one was a bit hard on that chap. It was obvious that he was
Oh,
making a
yeah,
joke for his, his successor. Indeed, there wasn't any money left due to there having been a crash, but I think
it
one
was a
was a bit hard on that particular.
it was a joke, but it's also accurate. Is that what you're saying, Bridge? Fair enough. Anyway, so he said there was Gordon Brown. Said there was a need for a task force, right? Because it's not that involved world leaders, health experts, and the heads of international organizations with executive powers, because that always goes well when you assign executive powers to things and people who are not necessarily beholden to
Anyone?
to coordinate a response. A virtual meeting. It's not a virtual meeting. A digital meeting is probably accurate. But virtual meeting just means there was no meeting. It was just
Okay. Let's just for a moment just humor me here.
okay.
Okay.
I always humour Richard.
I don't know how many people would be in this cabinet. So this is the global world cabinet. Okay, the Globo Cab. Okay,
Yeah.
who's in it? Okay, so I mean, first off, obviously, it has to be Gordon Brown has to be in it. He has to be in the cabinet because it wouldn't exist without him.
Yeah.
Tony Blair, clearly, I mean, he's the Middle East peace envoy expert. He would have to be in it. Agreed?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm
Hillary
just.
Clinton, the most qualified candidate for US president ever. She would have to be in it, right?
I don't see why not.
Jean-Claude Juncker. I mean,
Or
we
you're not
can't
busy enough.
abandon all this experience.
Of course not. All this mismanagement experience would be great.
No, I'm just, sort of.
I like how he's.
If we would have such if we would have such a government, these would be the people, wouldn't it?
Yes. These would be the kinds of people suddenly in charge of like a $2 trillion package, effectively, and I wonder where that money would end up. Sorry, it's just this article is still trying to sell Gordon Brown as the savior of the world, right? During the financial crisis, Brown persuaded other global leaders of the need to bail out the banks. Yes, everyone's so happy about his decision to do that, as opposed to sacking the lot of them. letting them fail and then having new banks
Well,
rise up.
in all fairness, the banks did need to be bailed out. But I'm not really sure that it was Gordon Brown that convinced people.
I don't know necessarily. I'm just going off this
Well,
article. But
the-
as for whether or not the banks needed to be bailed out, I don't know about that so much.
Well, the good thing is that, from what I could tell anyway, a lot of even the usual lefties, far lefties and all that, were going, this maybe isn't such a good idea. So
Well,
there is that.
all I can say is, I'll just assume your account to be in a particular bank. So let's say NatWest, okay? So your account is in NatWest.
It is.
Now NatWest doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
Are you happy?
No. Not very happy at all. Not very happy at all. But that's exactly what happened with, what was it, Northern Rock?
So, yes, indeed. But now consider that. Remember, you are still where you are. Behind closed doors, coronavirus. You need to now do your next Tesco order or whatever. Remember, your NatWest account doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
Also, your wage doesn't get paid into your non-existent NatWest account, and so on, and so on, and so on. So, when it comes
it's a bit different.
when it comes to the banks being bailed out, they were bailed out, but the government took a stake in the banks. So the shareholders, the owners of the banks, were not bailed out. They lost out with the assets that the banks had put into them by the government in order to save them. To save them, the owners lost share in the bank. So, given that it's actually the owners that are, so to speak, the bank, they weren't bailed out, but the institution of the bank was bailed out. What galls folks, I think, more than anything else, was the fact that all these fat bonus recipients just continued on as ever. Because we do have a sort of managerial aristocracy in these grand institutions,
Yeah.
whether they be banks or anything else. And within a very short period of time, they said, oh, well, we're registering profits again, or, oh, we're in such a dire crisis, and I am the only man qualified to solve this and get us out of this crisis. So, of course, I need a bonus for if I manage to get us out of this crisis. So they were once again paying themselves millions of pounds. And it
Yep.
was that managerial class that had wrecked the banks in the first place. So that's where I have my gripe.
Yeah.
Because
When
when
no
it
one
comes
seems
to
to be
the
held.
actual bodies of the banks, they needed to be saved.
Well, that's a discussion for another time. No doubt. I need to go back over all that and remind myself and reacquaint. But no, I don't really have an answer for you now. I'd really rather not make this entire Fake Accents Unite episode about whether or
About
not
the
we should
banks.
be
Yes,
defending
the credit crunch.
the credit crunch. Yes. Oh dear. Oh, the cringe is coming out as well here. Like from today's briefing on coronavirus. So John Crace has said, with Raab at the reins, things are really getting finger-licking bad. What?
I like it how you say, at today's briefing about coronavirus. Frankly, saying about coronavirus is completely redundant.
Yes,
If there is a briefing about anything at the moment, it's only about one subject.
No, you know why they're referring to the whole finger licking bad thing, right?
Go on.
Well, it's because Dominic Raab was doing the thing that I think it was some American politician a couple of weeks ago did. It was like don't touch your face and all that. and then he licked his finger, turned the page of his speech after saying exactly the same thing.
Yeah, it was in fact the woman who was in charge of the healthcare or whatever, the
Yeah.
chief medical officer or whatever. And as she turned the page, she kind of licked her finger to turn the page, and then if you looked, there were the people behind her, the various assistants and other folks sort
Yeah,
of
wide-eyed.
and there was this black woman, and you could just see her kind of brows knitting as she was kind of looking to the far distance, as in, oh no, she didn't do that, did she?
Live on camera. Well, Dominic Raab did exactly the same thing.
Oh dear, that's all I'm getting at for that. I hadn't seen that, so that's
Well,
quite.
in all fairness, it could happen to the best of us. It's one
Yeah.
of those things where you just it's just second nature, these things. And yeah, but it is funny when it happens.
I'm sure the coronavirus would be like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I won't infect you. It was second nature. I understand. It's too much habit,
Well, then again, did you hear about the shampoo bottle liquor?
No.
Yes. That was justice.
The guy who there was this viral
Oh
clip that went
yes,
round about him licking shampoo
and
bottles in a shop on a
and
shelf.
he got arrested, didn't he?
Yes, the next thing you know, he's there in an orange jumpsuit on terrorism charges.
Trying to deploy a biological agent in a supermarket. Yeah.
But
And
what is
just
so
generally being
remarkable?
a clatty bastard.
But what is so remarkable is how many things about folks licking stuff there has been in the
Oh,
news.
this those stupid teenagers on flipping Instagram and whatever it is doing the coronavirus challenge where they lick a toilet seat.
But there was one really interesting one where there was a chap. He was kind of wearing a face mask, which he then pulled down, and then he licked his fingers, and then smeared his fingers onto the grab bars on a train.
Why?
There
Why
was two of them. One was supposedly in Hong Kong. There was another one in Belgium. But what was so remarkable about the one in Belgium is it came to prominence with Chinese subtitles going round, claiming that this was a film that had come to light of a man some time ago having done this in, wait for it, Wuhan.
Oh dear.
And you just went, I wonder who might have been involved in distributing that particular film.
Well, we
I couldn't
also
think. I mean, it could be anybody.
yeah, completely blank-minded. It's also the case of the stupid trend that was going on in Japan at the same time, which was like doorknob selfies, where you take a selfie of yourself with a door handle in your mouth. Why this was a thing?
Always hoping that while you're taking the selfie, nobody will approach from the other side and open the
try and
door.
open the door and knock a few teeth out. Although maybe that would have made them wise up a bit more. Goodness me. Yeah, and there was I saw some kind of general karmic justice of one of these stupid idiots who licked a doorknob, and they said, "Oh, actually, don't do the challenge. I actually have coronavirus now." And it's like I feel sorry for you, but at the same time, you've been a fucking idiot. Do you know what I mean? Why? And why public handles as well? The edgiest ones are the ones where it's in a public place.
Well,
Makes
not
me
only the
sick.
corona. I mean, God knows what else
You
you
might
might.
get tetanus or TB.
There'd be all sorts of stuff, hepatitis and whatever.
That's the one, not tuberculosis.
Yeah, not tuberculosis.
Hepatitis, HB, not TB. HP, not TB. Yeah. You can always tell them a bottle of bleach a day kills coronavirus and stops its spread. I mean, it would stop those kids from spreading anywhere, I suppose.
Well, the was it not? There was someone during the week there that Trump had said, they're working on a cure and there's this chemical compound. I can't remember what it was.
Is it the chloroquine one?
Yeah, that one, chloroquine. Yeah. And then a couple they drank a whole load of stuff that had chloroquine in it.
Ooh.
But it was kind of extreme grade fish tank cleaner or something.
Yes, it was
that-
aquarium cleaner.
Yes,
Yes,
aquarium cleaner.
Oh.
Yeah, and
of
they
course he
died,
was blamed for that. Yes.
and he was blamed for it, even though he didn't say go and drink anything that has it in it. You know, it was.
Yeah.
It was
It was. We are working on making a safe, ingestible substance.
yes, that
Please
has this
don't-
in it. It
Yeah.
seems to be being quite effective at the moment.
Um,
You know, and then because these idiots went, oh well, this has got that in it. It must be the same stuff. So
Yeah.
we'll go and drink some. Oh, they died. Right, Trump's to blame then.
Oh,
I mean,
goodness.
talking about that, there is sort of heartening news sort of going about in bits and pieces. So it's not as if we know that the worst is still ahead, really, when it comes to the amount of cases and whatever. But when it comes to seeing how industry is kind of trying to gear up to answer these things, there are sort of bits and pieces of news where you go, okay, well, it's actually good to see that steps are being taken. So there was a clip that I put the link on Twitter earlier today where JCB were showing the parts they were stenciling out of steel sheets
Yeah.
that were going to be the housing for the ventilators.
Oh, that's
Which were
wholesome.
they're the ventilators for the Dyson ventilators.
Yeah.
They've got a contract with the government for 10,000, but it's all subject to it actually passing muster, so to speak. But JCB are basically, I mean, normally they make bulldozers and stuff, don't they? Diggers. And now they're making parts for ventilators. And what is it? The Royal Mint are making visors for NHS staff.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think so. Yeah.
And
That's
I
good.
think
Because it's good to hear that JCB are doing something good for a change, because they're widely regarded as being an evil company.
and what is it? I think also some Formula One company or whatever is together with some other I think what is it? Is it British Aerospace? I'm not sure. Various other companies have kind of formed a group which again are contracted for another 10,000 ventilators. So you can see, it's all heavily improvised, but they are getting things together and are sort of starting to move.
Yeah, and there's something like almost 1 million people volunteering across the UK now as well to help.
Yeah, they're all
Talking of
signed
a
up. They're not
million.
necessarily being deployed, but they are signed up
Yeah.
and helping.
Talking of a million, what is it? Is it Ineos? I'm not sure. Some chemical company here in Britain announced last week that it would take them 10 days to start up a plant in the northeast, somewhere around Newcastle or Gateshead, and they would be producing 1 million bottles of hand sanitizer per month.
Good grief.
So you can see things are gearing up. Things are happening. And I remember seeing a piece where they talk to some hauliers and whatever about toilet paper on the BBC, and they were saying, well, yeah, I mean, we are going back and forth from the factories and whatever. They have got ample capacity to to make more toilet rolls. The simple problem is we can't ship the stuff into the supermarkets fast enough to keep up with them clearing the shelves.
And they do have the added disadvantage that they all need to be made with Boris Johnson's face on them at the moment, in keeping with Gordon Brown's
With the
desire.
directive by the world government.
Yes, by the world government. It's just one up, one down, one to polish.
I have this theory about the shelves being cleared, that actually it was all down to a few idiots.
I mean,
the great majority of the population for a while didn't move. They kept on shopping as normal. But a few idiots went in and kept on clearing the shelf. It was largely just toilet rolls. The rest of the shelves continued to be filled. And then eventually, I think, the mainstream, they began to realize, hang on a moment, if we don't move, these idiots are going to clear the stuff out of the way before we get a chance to get anything.
Yeah.
And then they started, ferreting the stuff away. And that's when suddenly the supermarket shelves cleared altogether.
Yeah,
I think
at the moment,
it really is a sort of a certain minority of complete nincompoops, which in a way instigated the whole thing.
it does appear to be mainly over as well. I mean, I don't know about you, whether or not you're going out or if you're receiving deliveries, but I go to shop at my local supermarket, and they are enforcing social distancing and a kind of 50 people in, 50 people out rule. So you do have to queue to get in. But there's pretty much everything there, with the exception of pasta, really.
Yeah.
And limited rice supplies. But the
Tins of chopped tomatoes. That's what I'm struggling to get.
yeah, but other than that, that's fine. And as long as you get there, at the right time, generally speaking, you can pick up what you need to pick up. They don't allow anyone.
You do realize that half the audience is wondering what culinary delights you whip up with your chopped tomatoes.
Oh no, they're not for me. They're for my neighbours.
I love.
There you go.
What's wrong with chopped tomatoes?
Well, nothing is. It's just basically, when you say chopped tomatoes, immediately everybody begins wondering, what is he doing with these chopped tomatoes?
There are
Does he
three
make those spaghetti?
there
What
are
is this?
three primary meals.
Pizza?
There are three primary meals to make with chopped tomatoes. Three primary meals.
Go ahead.
That would be chili, pasta bolognese, and for goodness sake,
Something else.
and something else. Yes,
Something else.
indeed.
Yeah,
Yes,
precisely. Yeah. Okay. Tailed, are you going to tell him or shall I? There is nothing more annoying than bolognese. It's a silent G.
It's bolognese, whatever. Whatever. I could call it ragu if I wanted, because that's what the Italians call it.
Oh, is that a silent G as well? Is it Rau?
Rau.
Well, actually, it's what the citizens of Bologna call it. The rest of Italy, I believe, does refer to it as
yeah, but
bolognese.
who cares about the rest of Italy? I mean, they're all dead at this point anyway, aren't they? That took a really dark turn.
Yeah, it did.
I hope my two Italian roommates who live upstairs will be down to throttle me in my sleep.
Have you heard any footsteps emanating from upstairs recently?
I'm afraid not. Just the sound of sharpening knives.
There you go.
Oh no.
Yeah, but they could be about to cook something delicious.
They could...
Perhaps it's the two of them who are responsible for the shortage in chopped tomato tins.
Oh, possibly, yeah. I went shopping last Wednesday, I think it was, and I was buying stuff for me and for some of my neighbours. I was doing the neighbourly thing and all that. And when I got to the till and I was putting everything through, at one point I got, so it was all my stuff and neighbour stuff and all that. And at one point the cashier looked up and she went, "Oh, I'm sorry, it's flagged up that I can't sell you these items." And I thought, "Oh, don't tell me they're rationing like pasta or whatever it was." But no, it was specifically biscuits. So
Right.
AA was right this whole time. The third packet of biscuits is tomorrow. But actually flagged up saying, "No, you've got too many items that are considered to be biscuits." And I was like, "But they're not for me." And they went, "Well, still, we can't sell you them."
Could I put them behind the current load and then you could sell them to me separately?
Well, I did ask if they could put it through in a separate transaction, but she wouldn't. So I just went to the shop next door instead. But I just thought that was a little bit ridiculous. Fair enough for things that are in short supply, or at least they can't stock the shelves quickly enough, like your toilet paper and all that. But I got a couple of packets of biscuits. No, only 2 packets of biscuits per customer. Even though they're not, none of them I can't even eat them. I can't even have them. So it wasn't for me at all.
Do you not like them, or is it just?
Oh, I've got a stupid gluten allergy thing, so I can't have pasta either.
I see.
Yeah, and at first I was like, haha, no one's panic buying the gluten-free stuff. I'm fine. But yeah, even the gluten-free pasta had disappeared. People were obviously that desperate for it. They just took the gluten-free stuff as well. You need to go to the vegan aisle. There's still loads of stuff there. No one's... Either that or the vegans are just too weak to go outside at the moment.
There's tofu up to the ceiling, isn't
yes,
there?
Absolutely, yeah.
The specialist £3 per 100 gram hummus is
Yeah.
still on the shelves to the rafters because
And to be fair, in Scotland, the fruit and veg aisle is pretty much untouched.
that doesn't surprise me. I once one of my mates is Scottish, and he came down to see me once, and he got really pissed off because we had a meal in Weatherspoons, and he asked for no salad on his burger, and it came with like a slice of tomato in it. And
Like, what the fuck is this?
And yeah, exactly. He was like, "I'm so angry, I might complain." I was like,
Yeah, it's that classic Frankie Boyle joke when he said that there was an English guy in a bar in Glasgow, and he goes up and asks for a lager and lime, and the bartender says, "We don't do cocktails."
yeah. Ed B Visual says, have you seen Peter Hitchens' response to coronavirus? I share some of his sentiments. This lockdown is an overreaction, and the data seems a bit dodgy. Thoughts, gentlemen?
I think he's just being contrarian.
I think he is being overly contrarian when it comes to this. Every single, statement that we've had from the government regarding, the use of these powers, the press's response, and then the government's response to how things are going to be operated, seems to be one of they seem a bit uncomfortable about the whole thing. Not in a we're doing something bad idea, but more of a we actually don't want to have this sort of running around for too long, which is completely different to say what has just happened in Hungary with Viktor Orban, where he's just been given unlimited executive powers with no sunset clause at all to deal with this stuff, but it comes with a whole raft of additional powers which seem unnecessary. It seems like it's been a power grab.
Is it the sort of additional power that stops the press from criticizing the government?
Possibly,
and does the fact that he now has greater responsibilities, is that also reflected in the fact that he's more than likely his salary has also gone up with it?
Oh, I just don't understand why he needs the power to execute gays in the street and hunt them like vermin.
Yes,
It seems
Well,
like unnecessary. I mean,
this is the
only
thing
if they're
with-
corona infected, of course. But why specifically the gays? I don't know.
This is the thing with some of the things that have been happening in Poland and in Hungary. There are a great many people who kind of see some of the nationalism that is going on over there, and they like to see this kind of stronger nationalism, and therefore they kind of embrace everything that is happening over there. One of the problems is that some of the things that are happening in Poland and Hungary are highly questionable.
I would say, but it's also the case that kind of nationalism has never really existed in Britain, I would say, to the same extent, and we just don't have the same sentiment for it. Does that make sense?
Well, put it like this: if we would have, Saint Corbyn, or I don't know, sort of the new version of Bono as he's standing in the street cheering himself. I mean, did you hear the thing of he's been proven right because the government has now, gone sort of all out with the budget?
Yeah, I saw. I think I put out a tweet about it saying, basically temporary reticent increases in spending that we know will harm the economy, and that we're going to do our utmost to try and claw back afterwards. It's not.
Yeah, he's been proven right.
It's
yes,
not.
That's the way he's.
Yeah, it's not equitable with equatable with.
If this were his government, I would be feeling considerably more uncomfortable about what has happened with the powers and police on the street than if it's Boris's government.
Definitely.
Is that you blowing your nose, Mark?
No, I don't know what you're talking about, mate. Like, just
you've got the coof.
And this is I would say this is not sort of wild partisanship. This is because you can tell with Boris's lot that, as you say, there is a certain reluctance there. This isn't sort of their immediate first instinct, as in let's give ourselves more power.
Let's
and tell everybody to stay at home.
Let's face it. If it had been under a Corbyn government, they would have nationalised the loo roll companies by this point, right?
Yes, they more than likely would have done.
They would have,
yes.
and then they'd have nationalised the supermarkets to ensure that the dwindling supplies of loo roll went to the right places. And they'd have obviously had to nationalise the transport network in order to
I can
transport
just see
that.
Diane Abbott being in charge of the nationalised Andrex company.
Yes, we will ensure that at least 500 million toilet rolls make their way to every single British household within the next 10 years.
At a price at £3.30. Yeah.
Yeah, something like that. Horrendous. And yeah, it's just things would be so much more far-reaching. This is why, again, I'm surprised that the left has been as quiet as it has been. We don't really see anything in terms of them calling for, say, the Tories to nationalise things or
Well,
to do anything.
I think a lot of this is basically, the government has taken a bet, as in, we think this may be the best way through. It may turn out to be completely wrong. In a way, we will just have to see how it turns out. But I think, when eventually one goes over how this whole process worked, I think packing Cheltenham full of people, a week or two before eventually you lock down the whole nation, will more than likely, folks will say that possibly wasn't the wisest thing to do.
Sorry, what are you
But-
referencing?
Do you remember the Cheltenham Festival?
Oh, right, yeah.
I mean, I don't know how many people were packed into a space tightly together there. I mean, in the tens and tens of thousands.
Just
And
enough to cause a national pandemic so that the government could make a power grab for
and
executive power.
didn't Liverpool also host? Was it Real Madrid? I'm not sure. So in Spain the match wouldn't have been allowed in front of an audience, but in Britain it was.
Oh, right, yes. Yeah.
So things like that, you look at it and you just go,
Oh, you're a bit late
folks,
there. Come on.
So that's where, if you then eventually end up doing a lockdown, you look a bit silly if not too long before you had these massive events with, lots and lots of people crammed together.
Mm. Yes, and it's things like the horse racing was still going on and it was jammed.
Well, as I say, Cheltenham, that was just a sea of people.
Yeah.
I mean, for people out there, just Google Cheltenham races 2020 and look at some of the pictures. Just try and assess how many people are there, and you can see it's jam-packed. And yeah, you just wonder how many folks walked out of that. I mean, when I mentioned it, someone actually tweeted back to me saying, "Oh well, some folks in the neighbourhood he knew had gone down there, and they're all now self-isolating."
Oh dear.
So yeah, you hear things like that, and you just go, "Yeah, this it didn't sound like the smartest move at the time."
No. Did you where do we think this will go? Obviously, at some point, this crisis will end, right? Whether or not it happens to be in 6 weeks or 6 months or whatever. But do you see any great changes in the national conversation regarding, I don't know, like international relations in particular, and the kind of the experiment of open borders? Because we know, for instance, that the Schengen zone was one of the areas which had the quickest spread because they just have no controls whatsoever between the nations.
They now have all got controls.
Yes, for the time being, although they are again asserted to be temporary, right?
Yes, yeah, but what I mean is the very fact that they've suddenly decided the controls in certain circumstances can be a good idea speaks for itself.
Because suddenly you have circumstances which can be defined.
Yes, whereas if you have an agreement that under no circumstances will you be closing the border, well, we already know of one now where you actually do think you need to close the border. So I think in that regard, it has dealt that a bit of a blow. I think also in countries like Italy, it's kind of fostered some sort of national resentment towards the rest of them. It, it- I mean, the fact that they get help from Russia but not from the EU
Yeah.
does kind of speak for itself.
Yes, the European
And
Union has not
which
been
more than
endearing
likely
itself.
countries like Russia are actually exploiting.
Yes. I mean, Russia, obviously, having closed the borders, and as far as we are aware, having had no cases themselves, means that, well, of course, they are in a position to offer things with a very very gloved hand, right?
I wonder whether Mr. Berlusconi was involved, because he's a friend of Putin's,
Hmm.
and he, I think, is set to possibly return to politics again,
You
because he
reckon?
was. Yes, I think he was only banned for a set number of years, and I think those years are about to expire.
Hmm.
And I still think one perhaps underestimates that man's power in Italy.
I mean, he does control effectively the Italian media as well as.
Yes, he does. And isn't it? Is it Inter Milan or AC Milan? I don't know. He has one of those two clubs.
He has he's owned AC Milan, or he used to own AC Milan. I think he sold
Well,
it a couple of years ago.
he a bit like Rupert Murdoch. He made a bet years and years back.
Yeah.
With Rupert Murdoch, I think he made much of his money at first with rugby league, wasn't it, in Australia? And like that, he kind of got his Sky Channel going. Whereas with Berlusconi, he was the one who decades ago said there will be a European League, and he was heavily behind televising European football. And if you think of the draw that is, the Champions League and whatever today, he was at the forefront of that. And therefore, yes, I mean, he obviously was a wealthy man at the time, but he bet the bank on that being a success, and that paid off handsomely for him. So I think that's where a lot of his money came from.
I mean, he does have like $5 billion, doesn't he?
Yes, he isn't without. you know why he's always smiling. There's nothing worse than a miserable billionaire, isn't there? I mean, if you're a billionaire, you're always happy.
I remember
Then
what's it Elon Musk saying, like, oh, we're gonna start helping to make ventilators when it's clear that there's a problem. And people did kindly point out to him, perhaps if you could see the problem approaching, you could start making ventilators in advance. Might be a little bit useful. But yeah, Berlusconi's he's an MEP at the moment, isn't he?
I don't know. I know he is still sort of, the unofficial head of his Forza Italia, which is his party he created.
Yeah.
And that was part of the coalition of Salvini's, which then fell apart when Salvini resigned, if you remember.
Yes.
And now they're charging Salvini with all sorts of things in order to try and prevent him coming to power, because the way things have been going in Italy, it looks as if Salvini might be able to form a government without needing any coalition partners. I mean, the last I heard, this was wonderfully presented by the BBC. Was it wasn't just the BBC; it was various other news outlets. Salvini fails in Emilia-Romagna, and you just went, really? He failed? He came second, so he failed, did he?
Yeah.
It's the most left-wing part of Italy. It was what once Scotland was, the Labour bastion.
Well, it's now what most of the currently Labour voting North is.
And I'm not even sure whether he came second or whether he came first but didn't get an all out majority. But
Right.
it was a ridiculous, it was an unimaginable result. But the way it was presented, as in Salvini fails because he didn't actually outright win, and you sort of think, I'm sorry, but if you're the Tory, say you're the Tory candidate, and you are coming in the largest party but without an all-out majority, or possibly even just narrowly the second party in Diane Abbott's constituency.
Yeah.
I think one can then from that extrapolate that you would do rather well in the rest of the nation.
Yes, I would think so.
So if the way one then presents that as in Tory candidate fails,
You
you can
Guardian
see the
Easter
bias
Britisher,
that is
you.
built into it is ridiculous.
Yes, I think so. I'm just gonna deal with a couple of super chats that come in. So Drake Glazer says, "Britisher, your kaiju is AAA. You get to ride AA's daughter into battle, where she will breathe fire over."
Is this the kind of baby that it will stay in baby form, but it will just keep growing and growing and growing and growing until it is a kind of Godzilla?
I mean, you'll have to ask AA about that. After all, it is his genus, but quite possibly.
I'm sure one will have to kind of, sort of scuffle around in the hair to see if there isn't the mark of 666 somewhere between those hairs,
No,
those follicles.
it's MMM for Mises, for
Mises.
no,
Yes.
Mises, Murray Rothbard, Mises, Murray, and
And Mayek.
and and what?
Mayek.
Oh, Mayek, yes, Mises, Murray, and Mayek. Clearly, yes. I really hope he's watching
The
this.
Mostrian school.
The
Yes.
Mostrian school.
Jesus.
This is getting out of hand. Mr. Gently Benevolent says, "Did the great Britisher wait until he was 20 to create the Earth, or was it more of a childhood sandbox project?"
That's why I said the Earth is an Airfix model assembled by a 20-year-old Britisher.
It is it's the Fergie tractor of planets, is it? Was
The
that cryptic
what?
enough?
The
Was that
what?
cryptic enough
That
to tempt everybody into another anecdote?
was cryptic enough for me to go, "What the bloody hell is a Fergie
Well, the
tractor?"
first ever Airfix model was a Ferguson tractor, even though it wasn't actually an Airfix model. You see,
Oh,
the chap the chap who made the tractor, Ferguson, he came up with this design that then took over the entire world. He really is one of the great sort of underappreciated engineers because it's worked wonders for agriculture. And when he had then come up with this genius design, it obviously needed to kind of be sold to the farmers. So one of the things one would want is perhaps a good way of illustrating it. So this chap came along who had just recently kind of perfected this sort of, I think, sort of high pressure plastic injection system or something like that. And he convinced Ferguson to kind of let him make some models to kind of illustrate the tractor, to kind of show folks, to have something to show. And because this was shortly after the war, they didn't actually have available plastic. So he would kind of scavenge all sorts of biros and whatever in order to melt them down.
oh, good grief!
So none of the models were the same color.
Amazing.
But he was then the one who went on after that to found Airfix. So the first Airfix model really was the Ferguson tractor model.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that interesting anecdote. I don't know really where I could like jump off the end of that and be like, that actually takes me down. Although I could say the only kind of Airfix model I ever had was the truck from the Wallace and Gromit feature-length film Curse of the Were-Rabbit.
Oh, well, there you go. See, that's information. I didn't even know that was an Airfix model.
It was,
Um,
I think it was produced by Airfix as a special thing.
Yeah. So, Tailed, were you into Airfix in your young days, or was that not did that never reach Scotland?
Well, no, it did reach Scotland. I think I maybe had one or two, but never really got into it very much.
I didn't get into it. I hated that model. I started out with the best of intentions. I loved the idea.
Tricky to assemble.
It was first of all difficult to assemble, and second of all, just it took an infuriating amount of time. So I remember it took me an entire summer to put this bloody thing together. And by the end, like it came to the time to paint it, and I didn't even want to look at it. Finally managed to paint it and realised I am no painter, and I should not be in charge of painting anything ever again in my entire life. And it sat there in pride of place on a mantelpiece, much to my mother's enjoyment for some time before
So you are not the kind of people to ask what you preferred making. Was it the planes or was it the tanks?
I did not make either, so I'm afraid no.
I think I made one plane really badly.
Was it a Spitfire?
I honestly can't even.
That would usually be the sort of thing you would start with, wouldn't it? I mean, little Spitfire.
I was much more a puzzle man. We would cycle through a couple, perhaps a dozen puzzles a month. Sort of 2,000-piece things. And I remember one time we got a 3D model of St. Paul's Cathedral version of a puzzle. One of these stupid...
Something you wouldn't have to paint, of course.
No, I wouldn't have to paint. It was already painted or made up or whatever, and it was made of these pieces. But I remember it being infuriating to put together nonetheless as well. Just because you have to do things like you assemble the dome and some of the pieces didn't fit together perfect flush. And you're going, don't fall in on yourself, because then you have to build half the thing again.
It'll take half the building down, yes.
Yeah.
I am of sufficient vintage where, Airfix models were a big thing. Obviously nowadays, that kind of company has waned in prominence. If you know what
definitely feel like you and Rubber, had you known each other.
Yes, I'm sure Rubber would know what I meant when I said that it was always the tracks on tanks always looked a bit incongruent. They looked as if they didn't quite belong there because the plastic that was kind of used for the tracks never seemed to kind of give them the correct track look, so to speak. It looked a bit. It didn't have enough sag in it to look like it would do if it were a proper tank.
I see. Yes. I remember, basically, the thing I remember from my childhood was it was the time when Scalextrics was becoming popular, or having a resurgence, perhaps. And I remember wailing away many, many hours, basically.
Do you mean wailing or whiling?
Whiling away many hours. What? No, I went wailing tailed. That's what I meant.
Well, I'd have been.
Well, as the Scalextrics cars went by, he would kind of once in a while try and harpoon one of them off the track.
Well, I thought maybe wailing, while trying to, put together an Airfix model.
Oh dear, no! I remember Scalextrics being great whilst the I don't know what they were made of. The metal contacts that were basically a kind of foil mesh that came off the bottom of the cars, which would rest on the metal contacts and then whiz it along.
They would be the little groove, wouldn't they?
Yes, as long as those were in good nick, then the cars worked beautifully, and it was a wonderful, wonderful thing to play with. As soon as they started wearing out, which happened relatively quickly, and the cars would either get flung off the end of it, or you'd get electrocuted every time you pick the car up. Definitely health and safety issues there. or you had like one car which worked much better than the others.
Yes, I can see that might be a problem. Yes.
Yeah, I recently came into possession of some old Skeletrics. I mean, I think one of them's from the late 70s and one's from the mid 80s. Somebody passed them on to me so that I could sell them on for them because they're a bit of a boomer and don't know how to use eBay and stuff. But obviously, no one's buying anything at the moment, and even if they
No.
did, I couldn't go to the post office to send it or anything.
I think you've discovered your new hobby that you need to get into.
No.
Tail, just
No.
get out Skeletrix.
No, I did put it all together in the front room to see if it all still works and everything, but all the cars are knackered.
Yeah.
One way or another.
we-
There's only
we-
one that travels, but the wheel falls off when it goes around the corner.
We were all super proud of our set because it had 3 loop the loops. But of course, over time, when you put with the track
Yeah, you
wearing
need
out,
plenty
and
of
that sort of thing,
acceleration to get
you,
around a loop to
you
loop.
need a real amount of acceleration because and what ends up happening is as soon as the contacts start wearing out on it, then when you get halfway up, it loses all momentum instantly, and there's a great drop as it falls down and crack lands on the other part of the track, and you go oops, and you have to take it off and whiz it around.
Did either of you ever see the program that James May did when he kind of revived sort of childhood toys in rather spectacular fashion?
I do not. I mean, I
So
saw.
he made he made an Airfix model, which was actually a Spitfire, but it was a life-sized Spitfire
Yes,
that they made.
I'm trying to remember the name of the series.
And they made a bridge, a footbridge that he could walk across. I think somewhere in Liverpool from Meccano.
Yeah, and he built a Lego house, didn't he?
A
as
Lego
well?
house,
This is
exactly.
James May's autistic endeavours, is it?
And then there was, I think, the
James
most
May's Toy
famous one.
Stories. I think.
The most famous one was where he, somewhere in the West Country, there were sort of several little small towns where once they had been a railway track, and then the beaching cuts had removed the railway track. So they used a Hornby railway track system,
Yeah.
and I think he had this little HO Flying Scotsman. And the idea was for the first time ever for a train to be reconnecting these little towns.
Oh.
But the one I found most fascinating was the glider they built. So they set out to break, I think, the world record with a glider. So the idea of a toy plane, that you can kind of fling off the top of a hill and it will, see how far it glides. And obviously they took it to the utmost. So they got proper advice on the aerodynamics. They worked out a guidance system whereby the glider would self-correct itself in order to maintain a direction. So even though it would be blown around by the wind, it would correct itself to keep on the right course. And they obviously then realized, okay, we will lift it up to the necessary height with a helicopter and then release it, and like that it will be able to glide.
Yeah.
And the idea was to cross the channel with it. But then the French wouldn't give permission.
Oh, bastards.
So in the end, they went, I think it was to Wales, and they managed, so basically there was this island, and they said, okay, this island is a comparable distance from the coast that the channel would be in length.
Yeah.
And they waited for a good day. They raised the thing up by helicopter, released it, and believe it or not, this thing flew to the island and then had sufficient altitude still to be hovering above the island. So it circled, losing height, and eventually beautifully came to glided onto the grass. It was a spectacular success. I think they themselves were a bit taken aback just how well they'd done with that one.
Nice. Muck 006 says he even built a Meccano motorbike and raced around the Isle of Man.
Oh, I didn't catch that.
And Colin P. Smith says he also sent Action Man into space.
Oh yes, I remember. Yes.
Which I know nothing about that one, but yeah. And he did a Scalextric Strix round Brands Hatch, from what I'm being told by the chat.
Yes, I remember him doing something with Scalextrics. I didn't see all of that, so I don't know how far that went. So, but yeah, that doesn't surprise me that he would do something on that scale, given the rest of the series.
Hikari Manakiniko says the Austrians reportedly didn't let Germans drive home from Italy unless they had a full tank of fuel, so as not to have to stop and fill whilst in Austria, which is an interesting.
Well, I mean, that
strategy.
shows that at least they were still, it was still being reasonable, because they closed the border to Italy when it really broke out.
Yeah.
Because obviously they don't just border Italy; they border the region that is worst hit.
Yeah.
So they closed the Brenner Pass, and then they must have basically said, "Okay, look, any Germans on the other side, we'll let you across, but only if you've actually filled up your tank on the Italian side." So to me, that's a reasonable approach. That you're basically saying, "Okay, look, we're closing the border, but we understand that there will be some people stranded, so we will let them through, but you have to be able to show that you've actually got a full tank."
Yeah. The Harry Channel says a question for the Britisher. Have you ever seen any of the old discount Bond movies like Our Man Flint with Robert Coburn or the Matt Helm movies? Did you enjoy them, or would you recommend anything along those lines other than Fantomas?
Well, Fantomas, I saw that's clearly a sort of bargain basement Bond. Isn't it James Coburn, Our Man Flint?
I don't know.
I seem to I seem to recall him. Didn't he kind of make out to be an insurance salesman or something like that? Um, but yeah, I remember sort of seeing a few. If it is what I think it is, that the Coburn one, I think um, that was quite amusing. You never know, if you were to see something like this now, 30 years after you last time saw it, where you would still enjoy it as much. But some of those were actually quite enjoyable. The art is for the productions never to take themselves too seriously. If you're making something that is a fraction of a budget of the big blockbuster, if you were trying to sell it as something dead serious, you're more than likely not going to do too well.
Hmm. Yes, any other recommendations for the Harry Channel? And he says yes, you're quite correct. It's not Robert Coburn, it's the other one.
And any other recommendations? I can't, off the top of my head, I can't think of anything. But no doubt afterwards, I'm going to be kicking myself, saying, "Oh, well, yeah, this." But no, right now I can't think of anything.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think I'm basically at the end of the stuff I wanted to talk about this evening. Any other interesting stories which have grabbed you throughout the week, gentlemen?
Just that apparently Piers Morgan has invited Peter Hitchens on to discuss the current situation in the UK.
That's
And,
interesting. Do you know what? I truly believe that is possibly because Pete Hitchens had a fracas with Julia Hartley Brewer the other day, where she just said, "You're basically an insufferable guest," and so that's the reason I'd love to have you on.
Piers Morgan is an insufferable host.
Yes,
so
that's what I thought.
amazing television.
Basically she said, "I'd love to have you on, Peter. Your opinions would be welcome, but unfortunately you deflect. You refuse to engage with the questions. You answer the question that you yourself will pose to yourself, and you're a bit insufferable, really." And he said, "You're clearly weak. You can't deal with the kind of the kind of opinions
You
I'm
skimmed
laying out
milk
there."
drinking reprobate.
Yes, you skimmed milk drinking reprobate. So yeah, it's. I feel like that has probably sparked Piers to go, maybe we could have him on. Why maybe not? And
Well, I've put it. You asked, so I delivered. I mentioned this in the week that was yesterday. China promoting bear bile.
what?
That was yes. This was one of those where you just go, oh, really? So China's National Health Commission published a list of recommended treatments, including injections that contain bear bile powder.
Of course.
But then, before you just knock the Chinese, also remember that the Indians also are big on cow urine and cow poo
Oh,
being various curatives for COVID-19
this
because of
is.
the curative properties of Indian cows. So, yes, these are the two great powers of the future, ladies and gentlemen, India and China. They will rule the world.
I mean, this is a bit
Uh,
homeopathic, isn't it? Surely they're not actually drinking like a litre of bear bile in order to.
well, in India they were having what is it? Cow urine drinking parties. At least there was one that was reported in the Mirror.
I want to
Um,
throw up. Grief.
but yes, the bear bile. Given that we've just had the whole thing with the Chinese wet markets and whatever, and the
Yeah,
suspicion that perhaps that might have had something to do with this bloody outbreak,
I like.
and
Yeah, go on.
their response to it is bear bile.
Yes. I love this paragraph which says traditional Chinese medicinal practitioners typically use Tan Rei King, which is the name for the substance they've derived from the bear bile, to treat bronchitis and upper respiratory infections. Clifford Steer, a professor at the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis, has studied the medical benefits of ursodeoxycholic acid, as it's called. He knows of no evidence that it is an effective treatment for coronavirus, but it is distinct from other bile acids in its ability to keep cells alive and may alleviate due to anti-inflammatory properties. But at the same time, we've all been told not to take things like ibuprofen because anti-inflammatories actually stop
Yeah,
your body from
yeah.
having a
But as I say,
temperature.
what is so wonderful about this is, as I say, China's National Health Commission.
I mean, yes, it's the
So
same.
this
It's
isn't
as
this isn't
ridiculous.
some columnist in a
No,
newspaper who's
it
mentioned something.
it's as ridiculous as the NHS offering homeopathy. Yes, which they do, by the way. Absolutely not.
I still, I know it wasn't homeopathy, but it's in the same vein. I still remember that Billy Connolly gag where he's doing his routine up on stage and he's talking about these various, quack treatments, and he says, "Yes, I see it now. There's a massive pile up on a Scottish motorway. You know, there's people bleeding everywhere. There's a man half a leg missing. People are desperately trying to tie off his thigh in order to stop the bleeding. And then you hear the call through the crowd, 'Please make way. I am an aromatherapist.'"
Yeah, it reminds me of the Mitchell and Webb homeopathy sketch where they're going, we need to get him, 1 part per million. Are you sure that's enough, doctor? Perhaps try 2 parts per million, of some kind of crystal quartz in a glass or something like that in an IV. And then they go off for homeopathic lagers at the end, and it's just glasses of water. And he goes, yeah, that's strong stuff.
It's been years since that.
That's
Of
great.
course, there's a lot of Mitchell and Webb doing the rounds at the moment because they had a game show that was set during a post-apocalyptic
Oh,
sort of
yes.
setting, and it just says "remain indoors" at all times. So it just keeps flashing up on the screen, and they keep talking about or
The
alluding
event.
to the
Yes.
event.
Yeah.
Oh, did you hear? Sorry, go on. No, something just came to me there.
No, that was it.
Go
No,
ahead.
did you hear in Aachen they've been clearing this old sort of reliquary out of out of storage, and they'll be having it in sight because it is some relic celebrating a Christian martyr. and it's Saint Stephanie, and
Right.
she is known as a patron saint for fending off epidemics,
Okay.
but she has an alternative name. So this is not something that's been made up. This is an alternative name for Saint Stephanie. Saint Corona.
I like that in this kind of weird synchronicity thing that goes on from time to time, that Dean Koontz, who is a relatively well-known science fiction writer, predicted coronavirus. Coronavirus prediction. So if I type this in, apparently he did not predict it. In a book called The Eyes of Darkness. There's a paragraph and it says, they call the stuff Wuhan 400 because it was developed at their rDNA labs outside of the city of Wuhan. It was the 400th viable strain of man-made microorganisms created at that research center. And it was things like, it was talking about how it's going to wipe out things. Where is it? No, this is the better one as well. In around 2020, Sylvia Brown, End of Days, said, one of these great things. A severe pneumonia-like illness will spread throughout the globe, attacking the lungs and the bronchial tubes and resisting all known treatments. Almost more baffling than the illness itself will be the fact that it will suddenly vanish as quickly as it arrived, attack again 10 years later, and then disappear completely.
Is that referring to SARS and then...
no, this is Sylvia Brown's prophecies and predictions about the end of the world, which is just, you've got to be right once in a blue moon, haven't you?
Well, yeah, if you're vague enough, anyway, yeah. But of course, because this isn't just coronavirus; it's just a coronavirus. SARS was a coronavirus as well.
Where is this thing? Oh no, people clickbaiting that that the page was not real from the Dean Koontz book, but it was. Turns out, but that's quite funny. Right. On that note, gentlemen, I think it is time to end. But it's been an absolute pleasure to have you both on this evening. I feel like it's been a fun episode. Thank you very much to everyone who tuned in from quarantine or lockdown, wherever you happen to be. We appear to be being suppressed, so please share the stream wherever you go, and thank you very much for joining us. Any closing remarks, things that you'd like to shill, gentlemen? I should take that as a no.
That's a no.
In that case, all that remains is for me to thank my guests. Thank you very much, Tailed Feature.
Thank you very much for having me.
And thank you very much to the Britisher.
An honour and a privilege, as usual.
Marvellous. I will see you all next week for the next Fake Accents Unite. Take care, everyone. Stay safe, and have a great week.
Goodbye.